Say, O followers of the Son, have ye shut out yourselves from me by reason of my name? Wherefore ponder ye not in your hearts? Day and night ye have been calling upon your Lord, the Omnipotent. But when he came from the heaven of eternity in his great glory, ye turned aside from him and remained sunk in heedlessness. Consider those who rejected the Spirit, when he came unto them with manifest dominion. How numerous the Pharisees who had secluded themselves in synagogues in his name, lamenting over their separation from him. And yet when the portals of reunion were flung open, and the divine luminary shone resplendent from the dayspring of beauty, they disbelieved in God, the exalted, the mighty. They failed to attain his presence. Consider likewise how numerous at this time are the monks who have secluded themselves in their churches, calling upon the Spirit, Jesus. But when he appeared through the power of truth, they failed to draw nigh unto him, and are numbered with those that have gone far astray. Baha'u'llah. The faith of Baha'u'llah, if we would faithfully appraise it, can never and in no aspect of its teachings be at variance, much less conflict, with the purpose animating or the authority invested in the faith of Jesus Christ. Shoghi Effendi. So, our speaker today will be Mr. Jason Hiner, and his topic is What if Jesus already returned and we missed it? Jason Hiner is an award-winning journalist who's worked for over 2 decades as an editor covering the technology industry. He's written the definitive story of Apple's first employee, Bill Fernandez, who was also a Baha'i and was the person who introduced Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Jason has served in faith-based community building activities sponsored by the Baha'is for many years, including a special focus on youth literacy and virtues education for children. So with that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Hiner.
Thank you. What a joy to be here. Always a pleasure to be in community with folks who want to explore spiritual topics. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing some slides that I have that we'll use to go through our topic today. But thank you again. I'm so grateful to the folks who tuned in to this beautiful, powerful topic. We have to acknowledge that this is an incredibly rich topic, one that is truly impossible to cover, in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. So we have to, I have to acknowledge that today we're only going to really get a taste of this topic, an introduction to this topic, and give you the opportunity to further investigate it if you prefer. So for both the live audience and for the friends who are tuning in later to the video, again, thank you for being here. This is going to be a topic that's going to challenge some of your ideas and conceptions of what you think that you know. And so I want to invite us all to be open to that idea. We have to remember that every time prophets, God's chosen messengers, were sent, that they brought very challenging ideas, challenging words. They caught people off guard. They took them and took them out of their comfort zone in order to help them gain a greater understanding. And that's what the teachings of the Baha'i teachings do when it comes to this topic of the return of Jesus. Dozens and dozens of books have been written about this topic as well. And we're going to talk about some of those books and sort of point you in the direction of some of them. I also have to acknowledge one of the books that's not in this, but that I owe a great debt to the materials in this, come from Dr. David Young, who for many years worked on this topic and worked on sharing how to approach this topic in ways that are faithful to the Bible and the teachings of Jesus, and to the understanding of this topic from a Baha'i perspective, from the writings of Baha'u'llah, from the vision of Baha'u'llah. So, which is what we're going to explore today. It's also important to talk about that this is one person's understanding. You know, I'm sort of the unworthy vessel trying to sort of share a little taste of this topic with you. Lots of other souls who are much more deeply deeply have a deeper understanding of the Bible and of the Baha'i teachings have explored this. Like I said, they've written dozens of books on this topic. Really, every year there's a new book on this topic, as we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm going to ask for your patience as we go through. I'm sure there are going to be questions. You're welcome to use the chat to ask those questions. We will get to questions at the end. I will try to keep an eye on the chat, but at many times we could go on off course on this topic and go in many different directions because there's a lot that we're going to start to unpack. But we won't be able to do it all today. So I'm going to ask your patience as we sort of navigate our way through this one. The place that I would like to start is, since it's almost Easter. We're only, a few weeks away, 3 weeks away from Easter this year. I'd like for us to travel back to the first Easter. And the first Easter, around the year, most scholars put it, somewhere around, 30, 31, 34 AD, as we call it now. On the first Easter, of course, Jesus was crucified. And of course, the seminal event of Christianity would come from that, which is the resurrection, and what that means. And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But we're not going to have the time to explore that today. That's a powerful topic all of its own. And, the sort of literal meaning and the symbolic meaning, the spiritual meanings of it. But let's think about the crucifixion of Jesus for just a moment, because of Easter just being here. And think about the people of his time, right? So when Jesus was crucified, remember, all of his followers had essentially abandoned him, right? There were no, and remember, if you think of the only, a short time before, there was this powerful miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, right? So that's the one, a little bit of biblical trivia. The one miracle that's in all 4 Gospels is the feeding of the 5,000. The feeding of the 5,000 had happened not that long before, but by the time Jesus was crucified, everyone abandoned him. And essentially at that moment, he had 0 followers. Now, of course, their faith was resurrected, and they came to faith, and they played this incredible mission throughout that will be, celebrated throughout the ages, all of the wonderful work that they did afterward. But on the day, if we go back to the day that Jesus was crucified, let's think about all the people of his time that had rejected him. Some had heard him and been attracted to his teachings, but when he was crucified, thought, well, maybe he wasn't the one. Some had become believers, and then, obviously fear, persecution, all of that had sort of driven them underground. But others had never heard yet. So if we go back to Jerusalem, we'll go just to the city of Jerusalem on the day Jesus is crucified. Think about that there are people praying the Shema. This is the Jewish prayer that they're praying every day. People praying this prayer. And in that prayer, they're asking to see the Messiah, to see the day when the Messiah comes. People living in Jerusalem are praying this prayer. They're offering in sacrifice, a lamb, right? This is what you did at the time to show your devotion to God and your gratitude to God. You offered a sacrifice of a lamb. So here they are praying the Shema, praying their prayer. In that prayer, asking for the Messiah to come, offering their sacrifice of their lamb to God, as part of the Passover. And yet, steps, yards, miles, few, miles, steps, or even yards away. Here is the Messiah being crucified. And these people, maybe many of them had never even heard, or they'd only heard maybe a little bit of rumor, and then, here was the person getting crucified. So he must not be the Messiah. And we'll talk about what the expectations were of the Messiah. But the vast majority of the people, the vast majority of his own people, did not recognize him. And in fact, often not only their generation, but the generation after them didn't recognize him, because it took 200 to 300 years before most people even had awareness that there was this person who claimed to be the Messiah, and that now there were hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that believed this was true. And so these people who are living, steps, feet, yards, not far from where this was happening, it would take several generations, 3, 4, 5 generations of their ancestors before they even realized the Messiah had come, and that they had missed it. Right? That's just a summary of what we know. And what we're going to explore today is, why was that? In one sense, what we're going to explore. Why was that? Why did they miss it? Jesus came with all of these signs and wonders, as they called them then, miracles as we sometimes call them now. But really, beyond the miracles, Jesus praised not the people who saw miracles and believed, right? The people, the praise that Jesus, the people who Jesus praised the most were the ones who didn't see miracles and believed. So the important thing for us to keep in mind is that there were a lot of people who barely understood it happened, or had very little knowledge, and that it took even generations for them, their family, their descendants, to even understand that this happened, and that would eventually, and many of them would eventually, become believers that this had happened. So we learn that through the Bible, and the Bible tells us in many ways, like, the way God works in the world, right? And the way spirituality works. So let's keep that in mind as we explore what we're going to explore today. Think about this fact, that God's chosen people, ready for a Messiah, waiting, most of them missed it. And it took generations and generations and generations before they realized what had happened. And what I'm going to suggest is that history has perhaps repeated itself. It's a very challenging idea. And so with that, I'm going to ask you to think about some things differently, or to at least consider some ideas differently. All right. So in order to do this, let's talk a little bit about the way human beings see the world. This is going to help us, I think, a little bit as we explore this topic today. I think everybody's familiar with this this idea of the elephant and the blind, and that there's these blind people. In this case, 6 blind people are all, and they're all blindfolded, and they all are touching a different part of an elephant, and they're asked the question, "What is this?" Right? And one has the tail, says, "This is a rope." Another one has a hold of a leg and says, "This is a tree." Another one has a hold of the trunk and says, it's a snake. Another one holds one of the tusks and says, "This is a spear," right? And they are all correct. They are all sort of true. What they say is true, or at least it's a reasonable guess. It's a reasonable idea to consider that the part, based on what they are experiencing, that it is what they think it is. But when the blindfolds are taken off, they discover, this is not what I thought it was, right? The truth is that it's much larger, much more complex in one sense, and actually much more powerful and even sort of awe-inspiring. But they had a piece of the truth that they understood and knew, but the larger truth was much bigger than what they had ever conceived. All right, let's do another one of these. So similar idea, but we'll talk a little bit different. So I don't know if anybody's ever seen a diagram or this diagram before, but this diagram is a really helpful way to think about a number of things. And we'll talk about a couple of them. But if you're looking at this diagram from the light blue side, what you're seeing, and you see sort of, this is represented by the light shining on it. This looks like a circle, and you're pretty certain if you're looking straight ahead and all you can see, if you're looking straight ahead at that light blue side, all you see is the circle, this is a circle, right? Somebody asks you, what is it? This is a circle. But if you're on the other side and where the yellow side is, and you're looking straight ahead at this thing, as represented by the light beam, pointing in that direction, you see a square, and you are completely certain with 100% certainty and without no doubt, this is a square. And it's right. It's true. It looks like a square to you. Just as the person looking at the light blue side, it is true, they see a circle. But if you zoom out, you see that what you saw was true, what the other person saw was true. But the truth was actually different, was actually that it is a cylinder. It is, in one sense, neither a square or a circle. It is a cylinder. And we're gonna think about this in a number of ways today. One of the things that we can think about is Bible verses, right? You can take one Bible verse, look at it, and say, this is complete, this is true. And this is the way we need to think about this, whatever this is. But you can also look at another Bible verse, and in a sense, it can be also true, but different. So one Bible verse may make something look like it's a square, another one makes it look like it's a circle. But the truth is it's actually a cylinder, right? Both things are true at the same time because there's a larger truth that is even more powerful, right? And is actually more realistic and more true. So this is how we're going to have to approach some of the topics that we're thinking about today. Because there are some ways of thinking about things that we look at things, or the popular beliefs of things are really only looking at something from a circle, and they see a circle and they believe 100% this is a circle or a square. But in fact, we're going to find out that perhaps it's a cylinder. All right. So I'm not going to hold the secret back any longer. The main idea of this this topic we're going to explore today is that the return of Jesus is an open secret. That's a very challenging idea. It must be explored. If you're either uncomfortable with that idea or skeptical, good job. That's the right way to think about it, right? And why, and we'll look at the Bible verses that tell us why we should be skeptical and why we should also explore this idea a little further. All right. The return of Jesus is an open secret. Nearly every year, there's a new book from a Christian who discovers this secret, discovers in quotes, and writes about it. So this has been happening for 70 years. This book on the far left, Christ and Baha'u'llah, this was written by George Townsend. This was a very prominent member of the clergy for the Church of Ireland. He wrote this in the 1950s. This book, Thief in the Night, the next one over, this is in the 1960s. This is William Sears. He was a very popular, famous television personality in the 1960s in the United States. And he wrote this book that's especially aimed at this idea that what was the time of the greatest expectation for the return of Jesus? And it was in the 1840s. And he looks at all these places around the world, Israel, Europe, the US, and all these religious movements that started around this time because they were expecting and preparing for the return based on this verse in the book of Daniel that also Jesus refers to when he says, look, if you want to know when, like, look here. So then these other books, he cometh with the clouds. You look at all of these after Christ and Baha'u'llah, all the other ones are essentially Bible quotes that are used for titles. So he cometh with the clouds is a verse that we'll explore in a minute. Preparing for Christ's new name, that's based on this verse in Revelations chapter 3, verse 12, as it says there. Alex Gottdank was who wrote this book. Alex was a very evangelical Christian and very, very biblically based in his exploration of this topic. So for people who are really want to dig into scripture deeply, that book is a great place to start. It's really a dialogue about this topic. In the Glory of the Father, that's obviously also relates to biblical verses about the return of Jesus by Brian Leppard. So these are just a handful of them, of the books on this topic. Like I said, there are dozens. There's new every year. I can't even keep track of them all. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart as someone who came from a Christian background, Catholic in my case, and then has become a believer in this idea that Jesus returned for the past 32 years. All right, so first I'm going to sort of ask a question, and you can put a note in the chat if you have thoughts. So I'm going to ask the live audience their participation in this section. Who was Jesus of Nazareth, right? Who was he? We have to sort of, if we want to explore this topic of the return of Jesus, we really have to go back and ask ourselves, who was Jesus? So if anybody would like to put something in the chat, go ahead and drop it in. Well, I wet my whistle here with some tea. A carpenter, yep. So Jesus of Nazareth was a carpenter. If you want to explore, this is also a wonderful opportunity to say, if you want to explore who Jesus was, especially the humanity of Jesus and the Jewishness of Jesus too, there's a wonderful, that was one of the comments. He was a Jew. Yes, he was a Jew. He was a carpenter. He was a Jew. He was the king of the Jews. That's one of the comments in the, and he was the son of Joseph, also very good. Yeah. Jesus, son of Joseph of Nazareth, and Mary, son of Joseph and Mary, of course. Mary, very important, special. All of those are great. His name, Jesus in Hebrew, in Aramaic, which was sort of a variant of Hebrew at the time that Jesus lived, and then the words were translated into Greek and then into Latin. In none of those languages is there a J. So that sort of gives away the fact that, the name Jesus is actually a little bit more modern creation from the last few centuries in English, when these things were translated into English. Jesus' name was Yeshua, which was a form of Yehoshua. Yehoshua in the Hebrew is Joshua, the very famous Joshua in the Bible during, from the time of Moses, and Joshua and Jericho, the great story there. So Jesus, Yehoshua, is sort of the name that this comes from. and it means Yahweh saves, and Yehoshua is Joshua. Yeshua is like a shortened form of Joshua, almost just like saying Josh, right? So Jesus' name was a very common name. At the time of Jesus' death, there were, and archaeologists have found, 40 or 50 other people by the same names that are, in graves that are marked and recorded at the same time. So that's why Jesus was Jesus, son of Joseph of Nazareth. You had to, you needed a few ways to recognize him because there were other people by the same name who were at his time. Also, I'm going to stop and mention all of the photos in the slideshow are photos that I've taken other than the book covers that I just showed. I love photography. And so that's also for YouTube and for anybody who's wondering, I have the rights to use these photos because I've taken the photos. This one is the Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, Italy. It's a beautiful cathedral. I climbed all 414 steps up to the top of the bell tower to take this photo. And that was a very thin corridor too, because it's for, for people that were much smaller in an older age in the 15th century when this was built. But I love this photo. This is also the dome that where Europeans rediscovered domes. So it's it's very, very special, unique place. So who was Jesus? Great. You all did a wonderful job. He was a spiritual teacher to his disciples, all of that. Challenger of the status quo. That's a great one. So thank you. Everybody in the chat, you did a great job. You get an A+. Appreciate all of those things. That's a great way to think about Jesus of Nazareth, sort of the human side of Jesus, right? Then there is this sort of divine nature of Jesus, where Jesus speaks with this amazing authority. Jesus says things like, before Abraham was, I am. So he's obviously not talking about Jesus of Nazareth, the human being, son of Joseph and Mary. He's speaking of, this divine voice. All right. So that's who Jesus was. Jesus made this claim that he was sent by God, that he came from heaven to deliver this message, to call people to this higher sense of the law, this higher sense of spirituality, this higher relationship with God. Lots of people followed him. Lots of people abandoned him when he was crucified. But his teachings, of course, hundreds of years later, became the basis of a whole different way of approaching the world. I think that's fair to say, whatever you believe about Jesus. So I'm going to ask this question now. This photo is from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. This is the church that is over the place traditionally where Jesus' grave was. So I'm going to ask this and ask again the sort of live audience to put their comments in the chat. What's the proof that Jesus was who he says he is? Or at least, that you've heard people say when they say, what's the proof that Jesus who he says he was? Remember that the Gospels, all four of the Gospels are essentially making an argument that Jesus was who he says he was. But, if we just think about this, let's okay, we have some good ones here. His words penetrated the hearts of men, his miracles, his claim, he raised the dead. Very good answers. When you ask most people this, and And this group is, I love this group is, has a little bit more of a broader perspective, which is awesome. The live audience. So when you ask most people this, they typically say one of two things, 9 out of 10 times. The resurrection, right? And look, the Apostle Paul says, without the resurrection, my teaching is in vain and your faith is in vain, writing to other believers in Jesus. So resurrection is extremely important. The resurrection or miracles. You know, he healed people, he healed lepers, he raised the dead, such as Lazarus. He also, did these other sort of signs and wonders, helped people that were blind to see again. He helped, people who were infirm, ill in some way to become whole again. There you go. That's the most common answer. 9 out of 10 people, you ask them, what was the proof Jesus was who he says he is? I'm going to suggest that maybe we shouldn't think of miracles as the proof of Jesus was who he says he was. And here's why. If you didn't see those things, they're very easy to deny. People make up all kinds of things, write all kinds of stories. There were tons of stories of other sort of wonders that people did at this time, and even Jesus says that false prophets will come showing signs and wonders, basically doing miracles. And still, that doesn't make them true. That doesn't make them a true prophet. So Jesus also discounts this idea of miracles. And remember when Jesus goes off into the desert after he's baptized by John and he sort of has his calling, he sees sort of the dove, the Holy Spirit descend on him. He goes into the wilderness, and then he's tempted, right, by Satan. He has this temptation. And in it, what does Satan do? Satan asks him to perform a miracle. And the answer is, it's said that no one should test God, that, you can't ask for a miracle as a way to test God. So Jesus also affirms that really miracles are not a good way to do it. And if we think of essentially, if we were talking to a skeptic would look at the resurrection as a miracle. So if we take miracles out of the equation, here's what I'm going to suggest we can consider as the proof of Jesus' mission. So we know this person, a man named Jesus of Nazareth, lived, at this time in the 1st century AD. And he came and he made a very powerful claim. And he spoke with what appears to be very clear authority, or at least that he believed he spoke with authority. Today, 2,000 years later, at this very moment, somewhere in the world, someone is picking up, this book, reading it, and because of it, they are going to ask forgiveness of somebody that they've done something wrong to, or they're going to stop abusing alcohol and being cruel to people in their family, or they're going to go and be generous and display generosity to give to someone who doesn't have enough, maybe doesn't have enough food, doesn't have shelter. They're going to read the words of Jesus and they're going to be inspired today, somewhere in the world, to do an act of unselfishness, of caring, of kindness, of sacrifice to another person. So it's important for us from that perspective to realize this is not a book of information, right? This is a book of transformation. There's lots of stories with information that tell about wonders and signs and amazing deeds of people, whether it's, the Odyssey and the Iliad, all kinds of Gilgamesh, all kinds of books that are even around the same time as the Bible, sort of roughly. And they may be interesting and maybe inspire courage in someone or something like that, but they don't transform them into a spiritual, to focus on the life of the spirit, which isn't focused on selfishness, which isn't focused on what they can get or how they can use another person to get things that they want. It's focused, the teachings of Jesus are focused on raising ourselves to a higher spiritual standard, a higher moral or ethical standard. Now, plenty of people can say, look, some of the worst things in history have been done in the name of God, and using this, book to justify them. We can't judge the book by terrible things that people do to justify. If a book is powerful, people will try to use it for their own means. They will try to, distort it and twist the words and use them in selfish ways for their own gain, right? That doesn't disprove it. What proves it is that people are taking those words and doing it in a way to exhibit these unselfish acts. So could you or I stand up today, say some words, and expect that 1,000, 2,000 years later, people are going to be reading them and be completely transformed by them and change their life? Very, very unlikely, right? Very, very, very infinitesimally unlikely. So that, I would suggest, is the greatest proof that Jesus is who he says he is. And not only that, Jesus pretty much said that too. He said, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. So this is a book of transformation. It's not a book of information. It's a book of transformation. And that's often the way that we need to approach it when we also think about this topic too. All right. So now we're going to dig into this a little bit. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is really based on part of the Bible that I would encourage everybody to read for themselves, right? This is sometimes called the Olivet Discourse. It's Matthew chapter 24 and 25. Olivet Discourse is just called it that because Jesus said these words in Matthew 24 and 25 to his disciples while he was standing on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem. So the Mount of Olives there. I took this photo. These are my photos. I own these photos. I had the bounty of standing on the Mount of Olives and hearing this wonderful tour guide singing us a song about the sort of these promises of that there will come a day that we will beat our swords into plowshares, that there will be peace, that there will be justice in the world. He did a beautiful job of singing these wonderful words that were from Isaiah and other parts of the Hebrew Bible. And so I would just say that, this Olivet Discourse is a place where we're going to come back to Matthew 24, especially a bunch of times as we talk through some of this today. All right. The first idea we're going to talk about is, why did the people of Jesus' time reject him? He came with all these signs and wonders. And again, even Jesus is skeptical of signs and wonders as a way to believe in prophets, right? But he came with all these signs and wonders as we think about them today, and still the people of his time didn't see, they rejected him. In fact, when he did the signs and wonders, a number of the Pharisees, the priests, at the time, they accused him of doing those in the name of Beelzebub, essentially in the name of Satan. Like, oh, it was, though, you're not doing those with the power of God. You're using the power of dark powers, essentially, as we would call them today. This photo, by the way, is also the Zin Valley in Israel, in the Negev. This is the valley. So looking down this valley, it looks just like this today. This is from a few years ago, but you can imagine in the Zin Valley was where the Israelites camped when they were coming out of Egypt. So you can look down this today and imagine like all these tents, pitched in this valley, looking, much the way it does now. Yeah, it's amazing how beautiful a desert can be Pretty cool. Okay. Why did the people of Jesus' time reject him? Anybody want to put anything in the chat? Please, drop in your thoughts here. Why did the people of Jesus' time reject him? All right. Well, they're okay. They were attached to their own religion or their own ideas about the religion. Very good. All right. I'm going to put a few in here. So he was a man just like us. Sure. They looked at him and they saw a human being. And they're like, how is he different from you or I? This is one of the greatest veils for all of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, right? Moses, Abraham, the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, all of them, they walked on the earth. They ate their meals. They did all the things that people do, and so it was sometimes hard to see them as special or inspired. And it was the same with Jesus. We saw that from the people. So these are some of the reasons that again, just summarized here. We don't have too much time to dig into all of them, but just as a quick summary, why did the people of Jesus' time reject him? So the popular piety at the time expected a military Messiah. You've probably heard this idea before. They expected a military Messiah partly because they wanted a military Messiah. One that would free them from their oppressors, which at the time of Jesus was Rome. Before that, it had been others, right? There's multiple conquerors of the people of Israel, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, multiple others. But they wanted a military Messiah who was going to come and free them from their oppressors. And Jesus did not do that. When he tells Pontius Pilate, he says, my kingdom is not of this world, right? My kingdom is not of this world. And he came to save them not from their oppressors, but from sins or from bad behavior, from doing things that lead to something much worse than being oppressed, which is sort of spiritual death, not realizing that the true life is the life of not the life of the flesh but the life of the spirit, right? This is what Jesus came to teach, and that no matter whether you are oppressed, whether you are looked down upon, ridiculed, that if you have spiritual sovereignty, right? He came to preach the kingdom of God. If you have spiritual sovereignty, then nothing can touch that. No one can oppress you. No one can enslave you. No one can determine your future or your joy or your happiness if you truly have the spiritual sovereignty that Jesus is speaking of. So that said, at the time, that was not a popular message, right? That was not a popular message. So why did they reject him? Because the popular piety of the time was expecting this military Messiah, not only expecting it, but wanting it. They had conceived the sort of the God that they wanted rather than the one that was in the scripture, right? This is a very common thing. Remember what happened when Moses went up to the mountain and got the 10 commandments? He came back down. What did people do? They got impatient. They said, you know what, we're just going to make our own God. They made the golden calf and they started worshiping that because that was the kind of worship they wanted. That was easier. It was what they were used to. It was more comfortable to them. And Moses came down with the 10 commandments and all of a sudden the people had turned their backs on God and all the teachings that he had brought them. So this is a very cyclical phenomenon is the most important point. So what specifically did they reject Jesus at the time and as not being the Messiah? He didn't fulfill the prophecies literally. That's the number one sort of overarching one of all of these. He did not literally fulfill the prophecies. And so because of that, his name was Jesus or Yeshua at the time and not Emmanuel. So in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, it says the Messiah's name is going to be Emmanuel. So when he came, his name wasn't Emmanuel. But Emmanuel means God is with us, right? So he was spiritually the fulfillment of that prophecy, because with him, God was with us. God came and through Jesus, was able to bring his message and bring sort of the next stage of the fulfillment of God's promises in the Hebrew Bible. He did fulfill. He was Emmanuel, and Matthew in the book of Matthew also takes the time to explain this a bit as well. But at the time, he was rejected because his name wasn't Emmanuel. He did not come from an unknown place. That was one of the prophecies of the Messiah. He will come from an unknown place. So literally, they thought, well, that'll be like the name of a city we've never heard of. It'll be from somebody from somewhere out there, a city that we've never heard of. So that also made it sound like it was somebody coming from outside, right? Israel at the time. But what did Jesus say when they asked him about this prophecy? He said, I did come from a place you never heard of. I came from heaven. Because at the time they said, we know this person. He came from Nazareth. We know where he came from. He can't be the Messiah because the Messiah is going to come from an unknown place. But Jesus said, spiritually, he came from an unknown place. He came from heaven. He did not sit on the throne of David as an earthly king. That was one of the promises, right? And what Jesus said, what did he say to Pontius Pilate? My sovereignty is not of this world. He did sit on the throne of David, but the throne of David had been elevated, right, to a spiritual height that was greater than what had been seen. He didn't overthrow Israel's enemies. He wasn't the military Messiah. What he did overthrow, what he did help conquer was sin, right? He helped understand that spirituality, if you conquer sin, nothing can conquer you, can conquer your spirit. This idea was very challenging, but obviously incredibly powerful. It's inspired people for 2,000 years to change their life, to live unselfishly, to not just think about themselves, to think about others, to do good in the world. He did not restore the temple and usher in an era of peace. Now, one of the ways that there are prophecies about the Messiah that were not fulfilled, right? And both some Jews and Christians see this as some of the prophecies that weren't fulfilled, is that Jesus, these prophecies, especially in Isaiah, don't refer to just the first coming of Jesus, but also the second, right? So he didn't restore the temple and usher in an era of peace. And what sometimes people today will, when you ask them about this, they'll say, well, that's going to happen when he comes again. That will happen at the second advent, as sometimes people saw it. Also, all flesh did not see it as prophesied in Isaiah. So, in Isaiah, it says that when the Messiah comes, all flesh will see it. And it's like, well, only a few people here saw it. If you understand that literally, only a few people in, Israel and the people around them saw. So it couldn't be the Messiah if you take that literally. So here's where we have to take a verse from the Hebrew Bible, right, to think about this a little bit. This is from Isaiah chapter 29, verse 13. This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. Right? There's this very real danger of, like, when you have religion, when you have worship, that your own ideas start to become more important than what you're worshiping. So not only that, but Jesus quoted this in Matthew chapter 15, verses 7 to 11. Jesus quoted this when the Pharisees come and they're questioning him and they're doubting his teachings, and they're also essentially upbraiding him for not following the law. Jesus says, "You hypocrites, you are the ones that Isaiah was talking about when he said this verse," right? we have to all think about all people in religion have to really be thoughtful about this idea, because it's very powerful and it's very easy to fall into, right? This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. We tend to, worship in ways that are comfortable to us, that are, meet the sort of ideas we have, right? When you see people sort of shopping around for a place to worship in that's the one thing you have to be super careful of, right? Because it's also in some sense not just about our comfort, right? There's a greater truth that we have to keep in mind. And Jesus didn't make people very comfortable. In his words, the Sermon on the Mount, his first public sermon in Matthew, right? In chapter 7 in Matthew, his first public sermon, he comes and he tells people, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the poor in spirit. He sort of flips almost all the ideas people have about what a good life looks like on their head. So he was not making people very comfortable. But he was helping them to understand that there's a higher calling than just what we eat or drink, or who our rulers are, our earthly rulers are. And it's a very challenging and very powerful idea. All right. So in the being mindful of time, we have some more slides that I want to make sure we get through. So we have to explore this idea of, what does the Bible say about when will Jesus return? This is a tour guide in Jerusalem outside of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Had a really nice little flag. He had a group that he was following. So this photo is just here for fun, nothing symbolic about it. All right, what are the signs of the end of the age? So this is where Matthew 24 comes in. And this sort of the Olivet discourse, or the discourse Jesus gave on the Mount of Olives to his disciples, telling them, here's what people have to look for at the end of the age, as he sometimes, called it. He said, false prophets will multiply. People will come showing signs and wonders. Again, remember, signs and wonders mean miracles. So he's saying miracles are not the way to judge people, because there will be false prophets that show many signs and wonders. Wars and rumors of war. So times where there's just going to be, these worldwide conflagrations. Famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. So natural disasters are going to be happening. Persecutions of believers in God. People who believe in God become persecuted, ridiculed. That's one of the things that he talks about. There'll be an increase in lawlessness and wickedness. So things will get worse, right? Like, you think it's bad now, it's going to be even worse when the end of the age comes. The gospel will be spread to all nations. Does anybody know there is actually a time frame when the gospel was spread to all nations? 1840s. In the 1840s was the last places on earth where the gospel was spread. There's two faith traditions that exist in every country of the world. You can probably guess what they are: Christianity and Baha'i. We'll talk more about why in a few minutes. All right, and then the regathering of the people of Israel. That's from Ezekiel 36:37. So at the time of the Messiah, the time of the end of the age, the regathering of the people of Israel, they will be returned. The people of Israel, the Jews, will be returned to their homeland. You probably have seen this one. This comes up in popular piety a lot as well. That, okay, because that happened, right? 1948. It was happening. It was building up a long time before that, but it became official in 1948. So I think it's pretty easy to see why there are a lot of people out there on YouTube. There are a lot of people talking about these things and about, like, look, I'm checking a lot of boxes here and seeing sort of in the 20th century and now, like, there's a lot of boxes being checked on this list. So that's why there are a lot of people still feeling like are we living at the end times? Remember, the end times in life, remember, ends are also always beginnings. right? The end of one thing is always the beginning of another thing. And I think that's perhaps why Jesus referred to it as the end of the age, not as the end of the world, as in the destruction of the world, but the end of one thing and the beginning of another. So but since we asked this question of when, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. That's what Jesus said. Again, we're still in Matthew 24, where a lot of this happens. That's Matthew 24, verse 36. So then again, Jesus says, so also you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Sometimes it's translated as, he will come when you least expect. The Son of Man will come when you least expect. So I just want to pause for a second and say, Jesus was so adamant about this. He says this in multiple ways, right? But is that you be ready, be on watch is another way. Some of these things, there's other verses, some are translated in that way. Be on watch, you must be ready, you must be on watch, you must be prepared. He's encouraging them because you think about at his time, remember we started at the beginning, there were all these people who were waiting for this Messiah, calling on the Messiah, and in their own city, the Messiah was being crucified, and they were sacrificing the lambs. They were saying the prayers, asking for the Messiah to come, and they missed it. They weren't ready. They weren't looking. They weren't prepared. So perhaps that's why Jesus emphasizes so much that you have to be on watch, you have to be ready. And that implies that some people are going to miss it. That if you're not on watch, if you're not ready, if you're not diligent, if you're not vigilant, that you will miss it, right? That's the implication. Otherwise, if everybody's going to see it, then, what's the point? So that brings us to a very important point, which is, how will Jesus return? These stones here, by the way, these are stones in Jerusalem. These are the original stones. So you walk in Jerusalem today and you walk on stones like this, and you can imagine, like, oh my gosh, all the people that have potentially walked on these stones. You can sort of feel it there. You can feel the age and the all of the hopefulness and the tragedy and all of the things there. All right. How will Jesus return? This one is really important. There's a lot of different answers to this, right? We got to remember that not all Christians believe the same thing about this. There are, according to the Encyclopedia of Churches, one of them, there are 40,000 denominations of Christianity, right? Many of them have different understandings of the Bible, different understandings of how these things will happen. But there is a very popular, made popular by certain books and media and other things about how will Jesus return. So the popular piety today is often focused on this idea of physically from the clouds, that Jesus will return physically from the clouds. And I'm going to suggest that we consider the idea that this idea of Jesus coming physically from the clouds is our generation's version of expecting the military Messiah, right? It's taking something spiritual and expecting it to be literal. And so because of that, it becomes a real challenge to think about. Where does this come from, though? This is sometimes called the rapture, right? The word rapture does not exist in the Bible. That is a human idea. I think we could easily think about that as one of these ideas that Isaiah says people come to worship, human teachings as doctrines. So there are people get really caught up in this one. So you have to be thoughtful about it. Or I would suggest we should be thoughtful about it. Where does this come from, though? This comes from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. And it says, "For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so will be with the Lord forever. That you can see why people look at this and they're like, okay, he's going to come down in the clouds. We're all going to sort of rise up and meet him in the air. And then, that's how it's going to happen. That would be fine if there weren't a whole other mountain of evidence or verses that say something very different, right? To think that, okay, maybe this isn't physical, maybe this is spiritual. And as the Apostle Paul says, about the Bible, it must be, and about spiritual things and the teachings of Jesus, they must be spiritually discerned. That's what the Apostle Paul says. They must be spiritually discerned. So he's emphasizing this because even in his time, he's writing letters. People are thinking of things a little too literally and materialistically. And Paul is encouraging them, yet these things have to be spiritually discerned. Okay. And then here's this other one, Revelations. Revelations is obviously has a lot of, incredible imagery in it. And one of them is, behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him. So you see, you get the idea from these two verses, how people very reasonably look and think, okay, this is the way it's going to happen. But let's maybe take a step back and think about it just for a second. Remember that the first images of Jesus were not created until 200 years after his crucifixion. 200 years. And those first images show a beardless shepherd, right? We don't get the image of Jesus today the image that we use today with the long hair and the beard until 500 years after Jesus' death in some Byzantine art. That's the first time, 500 years after Jesus' death is the first time the sort of the long hair and the beard start to show up. The image that we have today, right? So when people think of this verse, they think of that image we have today and they're, well, that's him. Of course, I would see him. But we really don't know what Jesus looked like. So let's assume this is physically true. This person, one, comes down, floating out of the clouds. One, we're all going to run for cover, right? If we're going to be like, what on earth is happening? We're going to, flee for the hills if we actually saw some person, coming down from the clouds, especially that we don't know of, wearing, looking like something we had no idea of, and, wearing sort of, garments from 2,000 years ago. It would freak people out, right? If that physically happened. And also this idea of every eye shall see him. Well, if it happens in North America, not even every eye in North America is going to see. I mean, you could say, I know some people will make this argument today, well, that's why TV and sort of live, telecasting, that's why it happened, because they're going to see it on TV and everybody will see it at the same time. What about the people who are sleeping, right? What about so they can't, it's not possible on this earth for every eye to see at the same time, physically, literally. So we have to think, how could we understand that spiritually? And we don't have time to unpack that. There are ways you can think of it, but also sort of this idea, the dead in Christ will rise first, is really an interesting one too, right? So people thinking of that has taken that literally, and they're like, oh, people are going to like zombies. They're going to come out of the graves and they're going to be, alive again. But remember, what did Christ say about death and the dead, right? He talked about when there was a person who was going to follow him and said, you know what, I'm coming. I'll be there for your sermon. But I need to go and attend to my father's funeral first. And what did Jesus say to him? He said, let the dead bury the dead. Well, obviously, when he was talking about the dead there, he was talking about, because he was saying the dead people were going to bury the dead person. He didn't mean that they were physically dead. That would be impossible, right? For a dead person to bury another dead person. Let the spiritually dead bury the dead. And let the living follow me, was the implication, right? True life is the life of the spirit, not the life of the flesh. So that is understood as the Apostle Paul says, you have to that has to be spiritually discerned. And those are the eyes that we have to see these things with. So then there's another verse. So we have that verse that a lot of people hold to. And then this is another verse that's very important because, and it's also in, of course, Matthew 24. Because this is where people also get hung up on this idea of when Jesus returns, how will we recognize him, right? And if anybody says the return of Jesus, they sort of look at Matthew 24 verses 23 and 24 and they're like, can't be. And why? Because it says, at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. Do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders. Great signs and wonders are miracles to deceive, if possible, even the elect. The elect are like the believers who are, really firm and dedicated to their faith. And he's saying that false prophets and false messiahs can deceive even the elect. So that's important. And that's why at the beginning, as I said, like, if you're skeptical about this idea, you should be, right? This verse says it, Matthew 24, 23 and 24, verses 23 and 24. So I think that's also one of the ideas. People are like, well, if he comes in the clouds, then this verse is okay because it's not somebody, but still somebody has to say, look, there's Jesus. And that would be a pretty great wonder, a great sign or wonder. If somebody's floating down on the clouds out of heaven, that would be a pretty amazing sign and wonder if they say, look, there's Christ, there's the Messiah in this, and he's floating down the clouds. That would be a pretty amazing sign or wonder, right? So these ideas are at odds with each other if we understand them literally and physically. Again, the Apostle Paul says we have to discern them spiritually. All right, so where does that leave us? How can we understand how Jesus is going to come? Let's look at a couple. One of the ways he's going to come is like a thief in the night, like a thief in the night. If somebody comes to your house like a thief in the night and they steal a bunch of stuff, when do you realize? You can put it in the chat. When do you realize that the thief came? Yeah, after he's already gone. The thief came quietly, took your stuff and left, right? So Jesus is very precise about the words he uses, right? One of the things that makes it clear that they had written down a lot of these sayings is the precision of the language that Jesus uses. So let's read a couple of these thief in the night examples. For you know very well, so this is Paul writing in Thessalonians, that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. So Paul is saying, you know very well that the Lord will come like a thief in the night. So what he's saying is, this is well known among all the believers. So this is before the Gospels were written. Thessalonians predates the Gospels. So even before the Gospels are written, Paul is writing and saying, look, we all know, it's been said many times, that the Lord will come like a thief in the night. So this is common knowledge. This is written about, 50, 60, 70 AD. So not that long after Jesus' death and crucifixion. And already by then it had been, they said like, look, we got to be ready because he's coming like a thief in the night. You don't know the hour. And they were wondering if it was going to happen in their generation because Jesus had put that level of urgency around being ready. Okay. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. So there's a lot of imagery here, right? Again, if we think about those things physically, it could be, maybe, but I think perhaps we also need to discern those spiritually as well. But again, it's emphasizing this idea. This is Peter, again, writing, earlier that the day of the Lord will come like a thief. So this was common language among the disciples, right? That they're using this thief in the night metaphor. And so then we have Revelations chapter 16, verse 15, of course. Look, I come with the feet like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as not to go naked and shamefully exposed. So again, this idea, I come like a thief. So you don't realize a thief came until they're already gone. That's key. Remember, most of the people didn't realize that the Messiah had come until hundreds of years afterwards, right? So this is Jesus predicting that the same thing is going to happen when he returns. People aren't going to realize then. It's not going to be till after he's gone that people are going to realize that he came. That's a really important, really powerful idea that often is overlooked and not thought about very often, or that is not highlighted. The idea of, the very fantastical, coming in the clouds, much more talked about, much more fantastical. The thief in the night puts a lot more onus on us, right? It's like, okay, we got to be ready. We got to be looking. We've got to be searching. We've got to have our hearts ready, all of those things. All right. Another one similar to the thief in the night. Jesus said, again, Matthew 24, where a lot of this stuff happens, that what we're exploring today anyway, the sign of Noah. So Jesus says that his return will be like the days of Noah. He says, as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they did not know until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. So when did the people of Noah's time, they were just going on, they were marrying, they were having, parties, they were doing all of the things, eating and drinking. Meanwhile, Noah's building an ark, telling them, look, this is the time. And it wasn't until what? The flood came, and afterward, it wasn't until after it happened that they realized. So again, Jesus is emphasizing people aren't going to realize until after it's already happened. What's the most unexpected hour? Remember, there was the verse of like, it comes at an hour when no one knows, only not the angels in heaven or the Son, only the Father. And this comes at an hour when you least expect it. What's the hour you least expect? In the past. That's the hour you least expect, perhaps. All right, here's another one that's very often not thought about or considered. He will have a new name. He will have a new name. Interesting, huh? Okay. Maybe this is why, if it says, here is the Christ, there he is, maybe that's why Jesus says that, that's a way to know that that's not the case. That's not the Messiah. That's not the return, is if they say, look, there's Jesus over there. Why? Because he's going to have a new name at the return. All right, let's read a couple of these. Revelations chapter 3, verse 12. This is the sort of most well-known of these. The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of the heaven from God. And I will write on them my new name. I will write on them my new name. All right, how about Revelations chapter 19, verses 11 to 13? I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. So this is a sort of fiery version of Jesus. Okay, he is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. Whose name is the Word of God? Like, remember the beginning of John, if you're familiar with the beginning of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's Jesus, right? Jesus' divine nature, not Jesus of Nazareth, the human being, but the divine nature that Jesus spoke with, that divine authority that Jesus spoke with. So again, this figure on the white horse, he has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. So it's a new name. Obviously, they knew the name Jesus. So if it was a name that no one knows but he himself, it's a new name. All right. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. This is Revelations chapter 2, verse 17. To him who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, manna is food, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone, which no one knows except him who receives it. So this is essentially implying that the followers will have a new name that will be written on this stone, and they don't know what it is until they receive it. And then lastly, this idea of the new name goes back to the Hebrew Bible as well. So in Isaiah chapter 62, verse 2, remember Isaiah is sort of is commonly come to be understood to be referring to both the first advent, Jesus of Nazareth, and his return, the second advent, or the return of Jesus. So this one in Isaiah 62, verse 2, the nations will see your vindication and all kings your glory, and you will be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will bestow. All right, I want to keep us moving. So when God sent a chosen one, if we're having a chosen one that's going to come like a thief in the night, they're going to have a new name. They're going to be invested with spiritual sovereignty. How are we going to know that they're true? Remember, Jesus said people are going to come with signs and wonders. They're going to do miracles. They're going to do things that are unexpected. But that's not how you judge a prophet, right? Jesus has already told us. So how do we know they're true according to Jesus? This is the fruit and vegetable market in Jerusalem, which I love. It's very colorful, and it's a little bit, we'll see why that makes sense. Next quote here. Here's what Jesus says. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? So every sound tree bears good fruit, and but the bad tree bears evil fruit. A sound tree cannot bear evil fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. You will know them by their fruits. That's how we know what that. So what are the fruits? What are the fruits? What does that mean? We have Apostle Paul who unpacked this a bit for us in Galatians chapter 5, verse 20-22. The fruit of the Spirit, so Jesus is talking about obviously not physical fruits here. I think we can all agree on that. He's not talking about, they're coming away and they're giving out apples and pomegranates and oranges. No, the fruit of the Spirit is what he's talking about. And Paul explains the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. He gives us 9 adjectives to describe what the fruit of the Spirit is. That's how we know a prophet, a messenger. Jesus also says, and we don't have time to get into all of them, but Jesus also says that, they will speak and try to glory God and not glory themselves. That's a critical one as well. So that is why, and we'll talk a little bit more in a second, but that's why the return of Jesus is an open secret. Again, nearly every year, there's a new book from a Christian who discovers the secret and writes about it. So we know what to look for. We know what not to look for. And so the Bible also is encouraging us that we have to investigate. Remember, Jesus is so urgent about this. You have to be ready. You have to be on watch. That if you're not, you could miss it, right? That's really important. And he also seems to anticipate this idea that a lot of people are going to miss it and they aren't going to realize until afterwards, right? The thief in the night, the Noah thing, that it's not until after he's gone that then people will recognize. So here the Bible says to investigate. My teaching is not mine, but it is he who sent me. If any man will do his will, he shall know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority. He who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory, but he who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true. In him there is no falsehood. So think about this. So basically saying, if somebody's come and they're saying, I have this message, I am encouraging you to worship God, to glorify God. It's not that I have all the answers. Not some person coming and saying, I have all the answers. Trust me, a person, but a person that is glorifying God. And then, dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. Again, that's why we have to be skeptical. And I admire, your skepticism. If you're still, we've only just begun this topic. Like I said, we're about over for today, but this is a much bigger topic to explore. But why? Because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Even then, so this was, 100 years later after Jesus' death. This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, but every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. And then again, this be on watch. Be at watch at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place and stand before the Son of God. That you may, right? It's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. You have to be on watch. And you have to have the strength, pray for the strength to escape, all of these terrible things. Remember, we talked about all the signs that are going to happen before, in order to stand before the Son of Man. Okay, so the conclusion that I want to sort of mention is that millions of people now in every country of the world have come to believe that Jesus has returned. And so the question is, should you investigate this? Should you investigate this? The Bible says you probably should, right? You probably should. And if there are millions of people in the world now in every country that believe it, and you are a believer in Jesus and you believe in Jesus with all your heart, then if you're skeptical about it, you should want to know so that you can prove it wrong, right? And so I'm leaving that open as well, that you should investigate it and should decide whether it's worth believing. The person that the Baha'i teachings, and Baha'i comes from this person, Baha'u'llah. Baha'is believe that Baha'u'llah represents the return of Jesus spiritually represents the return of Jesus. This was the last, this place that's here, this garden, was the last place where Baha'u'llah, and I put the pronunciation up there, the ha is the emphasis. This was the last place that Baha'u'llah lived under house arrest. He was exiled. This was in northern Israel, near the plain of Sharon. This is the last place where he lived. It was not this fancy at the time. It's now a garden, one of the most beautiful gardens in the world, one of the most visited places in the world. And Baha'u'llah means glory of God, glory of the Lord, glory of the Father. So glory of God appears, just for a quick note, 17 times in the Bible. Glory of the Lord appears 38 times in the Bible. Baha'u'llah lived from 1817 to 1892. So he lived, in the 19th century. He was a descendant of Abraham and King David. He came from Persia, the land of the Magi in the Bible, the righteous Magi who came and followed the star to find Jesus. He rejected a life of luxury and privilege. He became known as the father of the poor. Instead of hanging around with ministers and with people in the government and others, he would hang around with the poor, the destitute, offering them encouragement, finding ways to be of help and service to them. He was imprisoned and tortured for his beliefs. He received his calling in the Black Pit, which was a dungeon. He was exiled because of his teachings to Baghdad, Turkey, and then the Holy Land. So he didn't choose to go in the Holy Land by himself, but and then he proclaimed that the next stage of human history and fulfillment of God's promises had begun. There's a lot we could say about Baha'u'llah. I will just put a few things here. You can look these up, and I'll give you some books where you can find them. But his name and what were the prophecies that Baha'u'llah fulfilled? There were many. He also made prophecies that were also fulfilled. But his name and title from Matthew 16:27, his location in Mount Carmel and the plain of Sharon in Isaiah 35. He came from the east, from Ezekiel and Micah. He came with a new name, as we talked about earlier. So his new name is Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. He was accompanied by events mentioned in Matthew 24, all of these things that we've talked about that have come to pass, cataclysms of various kinds. And he came as a thief in the night. It really is just now, even 150 years later, almost 200 years later, that people are coming to realize, like I said, people in every country of the world, of every religious background, have now come to believe that Baha'u'llah is the return of Jesus with a new name, like a thief in the night. And it's Baha'u'llah's vision for humanity that makes up the Baha'i teachings. What did Baha'u'llah say about Jesus? So this is what he said. Know thou that when the Son of Man yielded up his breath to God, the whole creation wept with a great weeping. By sacrificing himself, however, a fresh capacity was infused into all created things. Its evidences, as witnessed in all the peoples of the earth, are now manifest before thee. The deepest wisdom which the sages have uttered, the profoundest learning which any mind hath enfolded, the arts which the ablest hands have produced, the influence exerted by the most potent of rulers, are but manifestations of the quickening power released by his transcendent, his all-pervasive and resplendent spirit. We testify that when he came into the world, he shed the splendor of his glory upon all created things. Through him, the leper recovered from the leprosy of perversity and ignorance. Through him, the unchaste and wayward were healed. Through his power, born of Almighty God, the eyes of the blind were opened and the soul of the sinner sanctified. So what is Baha'i? Baha'i just means follower of Baha'u'llah. The Baha'i faith is now, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, again, sort of established in virtually every country in the world. It is a group of people that are working to put the teachings of Baha'u'llah into practice throughout the world. And the teachings of Baha'u'llah are the same spiritual teachings that Jesus taught, that Moses taught, that all of the other messengers, the chosen ones of God, have taught. So what does Baha'u'llah say about this? He says, this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. Let him that seeketh it attain it. And then the Universal House of Justice, that's the international governing body of the Baha'i faith, which is established in the Holy Land, on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel, where its headquarters is. Wrote in this document, One Common Faith, it said, Baha'u'llah has not brought into existence a new religion to stand beside the present multiplicity of sectarian organizations. Rather, he has recast the whole conception of religion as the principal force impelling the development of consciousness. It is exemplified today in a Baha'i community that has become the inheritor of humanity's entire spiritual legacy, a legacy equally available to all the earth's peoples. So, again, that brings us to this idea: the return of Jesus is an open secret. We only were able to touch on very, very, very little of this immense sort of truth, this immense challenging idea, incredible idea that Baha'u'llah has come
that he has appeared, that he has come with clouds. Clouds in this sense meaning clouds can also, if something is clouded, it's difficult to see, right? Those clouds are what cloud the glory or keep people from seeing the glory at times of God. It was the case with Jesus when he came, and it was the case with Baha'u'llah when he came. But the power of his words to transform people are the same power that Jesus had. And you have now, 8 million people all spread throughout the world that have been indeed transformed by the power of Baha'u'llah's words. If you would like to explore it, these are books. You can pick up many of them. Like I said, if you are very versed in the Bible, I would suggest the Preparing for Christ's New Name. That was the one that really helps to understand the biblical basis of these things. And in the chat, actually, somebody mentioned very well, not really the return of Jesus, but the return of the Spirit of Jesus, the same Holy Spirit animating the return of Jesus with a new name. The return of the Spirit of Jesus is what Baha'u'llah claimed. With that, thank you so much for your time and attention. I know this went longer than we expected. Like I said at the beginning, it is a very big topic to tackle, even in this amount of time. I will be doing another follow-up session in May called Christians' Top 5 Questions about the Baha'i Teachings. Encourage you to come to that if you'd like to learn more, especially our friends who are Christian and would like to understand more about what this is saying and what Baha'u'llah's claims are, and how it relates to Jesus and to Christianity. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And again, thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And although we are out of time, if people have questions, they can come to that next session, which is on May 17th. And we'll have time to, dive in more into this topic. But thank you so much. We really appreciated it.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
thank you. And so our speaker next Saturday will be Mrs. Sobeida Mani, and she'll be talking about why are Baha'is hopeful despite turbulent times. So again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time. And if you'd like to be in our mailing list, I'll put the link to that in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next Saturday. Bye.